Namaste, welcome to everyone, and a very new year, a Samvat New Year to everyone who is in India or outside. So today we are going to have a morning session where we're going to continue our reading, the second reading, part two of a book. You can see it in the screen itself, a Dharmic Social History of India, and this is the physical book. I'm going to read the physical book itself, and let me just share also the link. This is the link. This is I am sharing the direct publisher's link, so you can choose whichever vendor you want to purchase as per your liking. And now we'll directly go to the reading. So we're going to read the chapter 3. Chapter 3 is the Harappan caste mystery. Chapter 3, Harappan caste mystery. The relationship between Vedic and Harappan civilization continues to be a subject of intense debate. The once widely accepted Aryan invasion migration theory is highly contested. It is still unclear whether these two civilizations were distinct entities or contemporary complementary aspects, entities or complementary aspects of one another. The language of the Harappans is another contentious issue, with theories ranging from illiterate Harappan hypothesis to the Proto-Dravidian language theory. The concept of race, particularly of the Aryan race, has also been largely abandoned. However, the prevailing narrative in social sciences is that the caste Jati Varna complex was introduced and enforced by the Aryans, Indo-Europeans slash Brahmins. The dichotomy between Harappan and Vedic civilization plays a crucial role in this narrative. Today, a combination of archaeology, linguistics, and molecular genetics of ancient populations and anthropology paints a more nuanced and complex picture of social evolution that is suggested by simplistic notions of Aryan invasion, migration, or out of India theories. To truly grasp how Indian society and its culture dynamics have evolved, it is crucial to understand its complexity. This chapter, along with chapter 4, aims to unravel the Indus Valley civilization social system and examine how its socio-cultural elements have transformed or continued continued into contemporary Hindu social life. Bronze Age totalitarian empire or egalitarian state. So this para name is Bronze Age totalitarian empire or egalitarian state, encompassing. Let me just get encompassing a vast region of South Asia from the western mountains to the eastern plains, a civilization of astounding diversity and richness flourished along the Indus River system and its branches. This civilization had no kings, palaces, or glory glory, but one that built its cities with precision and order, traded with distant lands, worshipped unknown gods, a civilization that left behind no monument of conquest, no temples or idols, no legends or epics, a civilization that vanished from history, leaving only its mysterious script and its enigmatic seals. They were the Harappans, the people of the Indus Valley Civilization, and they baffled the modern world. How did they manage to live without rulers, wars, or art? How did they create such complex and harmonious society? And why did and Why did they disappear without a trace? These were the questions that haunted the British archaeologists who excavated their ruins in the 20th century. Sir Mortimer Wheeler, 1890 to 1976, and Stuart Piggott, 1910 to 1996, who had studied other Bronze Age civilizations in the West, could only see the Harappan culture as a puzzle and a frustrating mystery. They imagined they imagined it as a totalitarian state ruled by a priestly elite devoid of any creativity or individuality. Wheeler wrote in his book Harappa, 1946, the defense, the defenses and the symmetry. Okay. Documentary and archaeological evidence has familiarized us with the general structure of society in Egypt and the Middle East during the third millennia BC. It would be but natural to find that this similarity of supply and opportunity, combined with roughly analogous equipment produced in India, is a social organization not altogether unlike those of the contemporary West. Then he drew imaginary parallels. Then he drew imaginary parallels with other such civilizations. In Sumer, the wealth and discipline of the city-state vested were vested win of the okay were vested win the chief deities, that is, in the priesthood or the priest king. Thus, in the temple of Bau, at Lagash were 21 bakers with 27 female slaves, 25 brewers with 6 slaves, female wool preparers, spinners, and weavers, a male smith, and other artisans and officials. Similarly, a cloth factory employing 98 women and 63 children was situated within the enclosure of the temple of the moon god Nanar at Ur and came within the administration of the city and the temple. In essence, the picture is one of a rigid and highly evolved bureaucratic machine capable of organizing and distributing surplus wealth and defending it, but little conducive conducive to the political liberty of the individual. To this picture, Harappa, amplified by Mohenjo-daro, begins to assume a significantly similar outline. It can no longer be doubted that whatever the source of their authority and a dominant religious element may fairly be assumed, the lords of Harappa administered their city in a fashion not remote from that of the priest kind or governors of Sumer or Akkad. In other words, the social structure of Harappa conformed in principle with that of other riverine civilization of the day. What was what was expressed by Mortimer Wheeler in his report was taken to the was taken to the uneducated public at large by Stuart Piggott. Piggott's widely read works presented the Harappan civilization as a totalitarian and oppressive regime. In his influential book, Prehistoric India to 1000 BC on ancient India, he portrayed Harappan culture with scorn and contempt. Uh, an excerpt from his book. The Harappa sites and objects. The Harappa sites and objects lack not only the barbaric spontaneity of the older or more primitive cultures, but even the Chiri Nanavu. Okay, what is this? Chiri Nanavu vulgarity of the early dynastic Sumer, and display instead a dead level of bourgeois mediocrity in almost every branch of the visual arts and crafts. The dead hand, the dead hand of conservatism in design rather than in technique, lies heavy on all the Harappa products. Complex technical processes were known, well understood, and admirably organized for the production, but the output suffered from standardization and an almost puritanical utilitarianism. Okay, interesting. Uh, Stuff suffered from standardization and an almost puritanical utilitarianism, working within such narrow limits of traditional forms, fossilized over the centuries into a rigid, inescapable mental prison. The artist or craftsman would have found little outlet to save in developing technical virtuosity. From artifacts, he moves to the entire excavated sites themselves. The secrecy, the secrecy of those blank brick walls, the unadorned architecture of even the citadel buildings, the monotonous regularity of the streets, the stifling weight of tradi- dead tradition, all combined to make Harappa civilization one of the least attractive phases of ancient Oriental history. One can grudgingly admire the outcome of its ruthless authoritarian regime rather as one admires the civil engineering of the Roman army in the provinces, but with as little real enthusiasm. I can only say that there is something in Harappa civilization that I find repellent. These totalitarian ruling elite, the so-called priest kings, controlled both the social and the cultural lives of the people, even while admitting that it was dangerous to make deductions from the evidence with any confidence. Pickett was very sure of that. In its remarkable conservatism and uh, scrup- scrupulous preservation of even the details of everyday life intact for centuries, the texture of Harappa civilization was strongly theocratic tinge, was strongly theocratic tinge, and surely implies a social system where the unchanging traditions of the temple of a more account were of a more account than the ambitious ambitions of an individual ruler or the secular instability of the court, and in which from the land tenure was dictated by the priestly hierarchy. In 1953, Mortimer Wheeler authored the volume on the Indus civilization as part of the famous Cambridge History of India. Here, here, he looked into the religion of the Harappan civilization and concluded that it contained an assortment with an assumed hierarchy as he it perceived it in India today. He wrote, Moreover, the religion such as we may expect to encounter amongst the Harappans is more likely than not to be a loosely knit complex accumulated beliefs and observations 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 is elaborately, if implicitly graded, in which the lower grades may in fact have a greater hold upon the popular upon the popular mentality than the higher. That is so. That is so in India today, where the crudest animism and demonism still underlie the semi-philosophical and ethical concepts of the educated few, where the symbols of higher thought are the awesome physical realities of the peasantry. Some something of this duality or multiplicity would appear to have been present already to the Harappan society of the third millennia, as it was still present as it was still present to the more evolved societies of the classical world. In particular, the numerous terracotta figures of an almost nude female, which have been supposed to represent Mother Goddess, have no clear counterpart in the seals or major sculptures and may more easily be related to a household cult than to a state religion. Villainy of priesthood. So we are now reading the account of the British archaeologist Mortimer and Piggott, who wrote from their prism how the Harappan civilization would be like in terms of its social hierarchy, its administration, and now we are going to read about villainy of priesthood. How they thought that they are in their assumptions, in their analysis, how the priesthood class would actually control everything. Villainy of priestcraft. In the above passage, whether they are from Piggott or Wheeler, one could see that Harappan culture was shown as being controlled by a priestly king class that governed with authority derived from a religious belief system and enforcing a totalitarian society with a strangled and stifled cultural life. Now, okay, so now what we see is very important. When he talks about that a priestly king class who would actually control the whole society itself, and they would they would draw their mm, kingly powers from the gods above. This is a kind of a analogy which is drawn from the Sumer culture, the Sumerians or the Egyptians. So now, because they already have the idea that how the Sumerians or the Egyptian society actually left, actually functioned. Now they're just comparing this to Harappan civilization. Now they have still not done the objective analysis whether it is they or not. They're just taking it okay. If it's in the same time frame, they should be same. It's assumed. Even more central, even more central to our discussion is how Wheeler, a colonial scholar, contrasted the state religion of Harappans with the local religion of the people. He then compared this to the modern Indian religious situation. As some colonial and evangelical scholars saw, this passage is similar to what Bishop Robert Caldwell said about the Brahmin religion and the older uh, demonology, okay, demonology. His statement, made 100 years before Wheeler's, shows how colonial and evangelical views influence anthropology and history. In his lecture on in his lecture on Tirunelveli missions, Caldwell said, okay, just for people who are not familiar with, okay, Bishop Robert Caldwell is one of the like primary founders of the Vedic race theory. So when we read the book on the Vedic Maya, uh, we will we will know him intimately. Human nature, when left to itself, is bad enough, but it becomes still worse when the devil, in the shape of a bad religion, gets the management of it, and when God's gifts are placed at the devil's disposal. I may here remark that it is it is the peculiar policy of the Brahmins to render all religious systems of India subservient subservient to their purpose by making friends by making friends of them by making friends of them all. So the Brahmins were the friends of the gods. Brahmanism. This is Robert Caldwell giving a lecture in 1856 in Tirunelveli. Currently, it would be near Chennai. Brahmanism repudiated. Repudiates. Brahmanism repudiates exclusiveness. It incorporates all creeds, assimilates all, consecrates all. People are Brahmanism repudiates exclusiveness. It incorporates it incorporates all creeds, assimilates all, consecrates all. People are permitted to entertain any opinion they please and to practice any ceremonies they please, provided only that the supremacy of the Vedas and of the Brahmans is acknowledged. When that acknowledgement has been duly made, the new heterodoxy becomes another new authoritative orthodoxy, especially revealed by the Supreme Being Himself for the enlightenment and salvation of the particular class of people amongst whom it has become popular. Thus, Brahmanism yields and conquers, and hence, though the demon worship of Tinaveli is as far as possible repugnant. So, in the Christian worldview, if you are going to worship any deity other than their own, or if you are going to worship a murti, okay, or idol, it is considered as a demon worship, as possible repugnant to the genius of the Orthodox Hinduism, and was not only independent of it in origin, but as I believe, long anterior to it. Yet, even it has received a place in the cunningly devised mosaic of the Brahmins, and the devils have got themselves regarded as abnormal developments of the gods. This characterization is based on two elements: the projection of the Soviet totalitarian state, which was a Western fear, onto Harappan society. Okay, let me read it again. The characterization is based on two elements: the projection of the Soviet totalitarian state, which was a Western fear, onto Harappan society, and the Protestant aversion to priesthood. Wheeler seems to be obsessed with pointing out how women were kept in temples and how children and slaves served the priesthood in other Bronze Age cultures. Exactly. Unfortunately, these colonial frameworks became the basis for interpreting theo- theodiversity as either a priestly strategy or a conspiracy. Later, this would be linked to the caste system in India in a peculiar way. In Free India, a Soviet style socialist state adorned by Jawaharlal Nehru and almost universally accepted as the best form of government, with few exceptions, became an ideal. This gave a new twist to the perspective of Harappan civilization, which was seen as non-Aryan utopia without. So they are thinking the Harappans were the real socialist of ancient world, as non-Aryan utopia without social stratification like the Varna system. In this narrative, the Aryan invaders brought the Varna system and conquered the Harappans, who were Proto-Dravidian and spoke an ancient form of Tamil. This idea fueled Tamil identity politics and anti-Hindu ideology. The Harappans were portrayed as egalitarian and civilized, while the Indo-European were violent, savage, and oppressive. They imposed a system of ethnic discrimination where they claimed the positions of kings, priests, and traders and, and reduced the original inhabitants to servile servile or outcast status. This was the origin of the Varna caste system. Vedic religion also justified and reinforced this system, which centered on priest mediated sacrifices. These sacrifices maintained a birth based discrimination, which was seen as a form of karma. Vedic religion, karma is very important. Vedic religion was thus an early and perhaps the oldest form of apartheid. Harappan civilization, totalitarianism, Harappan civilization, egalitarian. Okay, so now the author, let me just show you so that you can understand. So now the author is showing a kind of a graph that how the thought process has changed, how the narrative has changed. In the initial stages, the Mortimer and Piggott wrote that Harappan civilization was a totalitarian, controlled by priest hierarchy, little individual freedom, stifling of creativity. Now, when a bit of time passed, the in the post-independent India, the narrative again changed. Now, Harappan civilization became the most egalitarian communist utopia of ancient India, conquered and corrupted by the invading, migrating Indo-European Aryans, Brahmins who imposed birth-based Varna system and religion. In both scenarios, priestcraft is associated with controlling society and imposing from above a social order that favors mostly its interests, destroying individual rights. To this day, this format is dominant in the thinking of anthropologists and sociologists who study Indian society, culture, and religion. The following passage is from an article by Tony Joseph on genetics and the Aryan migration debate that appeared in the Hindu 2017. The pioneering fearless explorers who discovered this land originally and settled in it and whose lineage still form the bedrock of our populations. Those who arrived later with a package of farming techniques and built the Indus Valley Civilization, whose cultural ideas and practices perhaps enrich much of our traditions today. Those who arrived from East Asia, probably bringing with them the practice of rice cultivation and all that goes with it. Those who came later with a language called Sanskrit and its associated beliefs and practices and reshaped our society in fundamental ways, and those who came even later for trade or for conquest and chose to stay, all have mingled and contributed to this civilization we call Indian. We are all migrants. So we are all migrants. We are from Ukraine, our homeland, fatherland. The above passage suggests that the non-Indo-European people were responsible for important civilizational achievements such as farming, food production. So we did not do anything. Okay. We were just sitting idle, doing nothing. People from outside came and taught us, you do this, you learn this, you learn this, you learn this. The above passage suggests that the Indo-European people were responsible for important civilizational achievements such as farming, food production, and urban planning. On the other hand, the Indo-European people contributed a language called Sanskrit and its associated beliefs and practices. that change our society in fundamental ways. Tony Joseph not only describes different migrations but also attributes specific characteristics and contributions to each of these migrations. He then paints a grand picture of the waves of migrants, giving a subtle racial dimension to such mapping. Comeback of a Catholic anthropology. Comeback of a Catholic anthropology. This can be linked to what one can call Catholic anthropology from Germany. We have heard a lot about Germany, German priests and Christian also preachers. In 1902, Wilhelm Schmidt, a Catholic cleric and scholar, attended a lecture by a German Indologist, Leopold von Schroeder, 1851 to 1920, and Wilhelm Schmidt is 1868 to 1954. Schroeder was an anti-evolutionist convinced of by the ideas was an anti-evolutionist convinced by the ideas of Andrew Lang, 1844-1912, a Scottish poet, novelist, and literary critic. The lecture's core idea was based on Lang's speculations that there was a higher primitive monotheism, a belief in a higher single god. Schroeder Lang also held that ancient humanity had three cultural, religious, linguistic circles. They were the totemic culture circle of the mostly hunters, which consisted of animism, totemism, and ancestral worship as a religious practice. Higher hunters, agrarian higher hunters, agrarian matriarchal circle, which consisted of a mixture of monotheism and polytheism, and the Central Asian herding culture. Schroeder Lang considered the last as patriarchal, a belief in a single creating God, and importantly, the cultural circle domesticated horses and performed horse sacrifices. Schmidt was inspired by this lecture and collaborated with another Catholic scholar, Wilhelm Koppers, who developed a theory of ancient races. He presented this theory in 1936 as an alternative to Nazi ideology, even though it was also based on race. According to Schmidt, there were three cultural circles worldwide. The first was the agrarian matriarchal circle, which included Indochina, China, and the Indus culture, Mesopotamia, Africa, and Europe. This circle was neither rational nor irrational in its cerebral culture. The second circle was the totemic cultural circle of the higher hunters, which consisted of the Dravidians and the Aboriginals. This circle was irrational in its traits. The third was the Central Asian herding culture, which he believed was the closest to the original culture's family culture and the religion. This circle was patriarchal and primitive monotheistic. Smith was the Catholic Church expert on anthropology. He strongly disagreed with the Nazi historiography, which he thought glorified the pagan culture. Now, we need to remember one very important thing. Uh, After the Dark Ages in Europe and when the Enlightened period came, the people who were actually doing the scholarly work, reading, writing, were primarily Christian priests. So whatever they wrote at that time, they had a bias that they thought from a Christian lens. So it's interesting to understand that when the priests are writing like this, you need to understand it's not an objective point of view because the priest has a Christian lens on which he sees the world. However, she shared the Nazis' anti-Semitism. Schmidt viewed Nazism as Schmidt he's a priest. Schmidt viewed Nazism as modernist and he wanted Europe to return to a church dominated medieval type society with stable hierarchies and integrating cooperation. His, his anthropology was a way to promote this worldview. This vision of a medieval type Catholic society was also supported by the Austro-fascist regimes, which had the backing of Pope Pius XI and Benito Mussolini. In Schmidt-Copper's thesis, Schmidt-Copper thesis suggests that the Indo-Germans emerged from a steppes of both livestock breeders and warriors. They started a world conquering mission, which also now is very interesting. Nobody has really explained in detail like why they all of a sudden became world conquering and invading. What happened in their land which prompted them to go and invade people for no reason. They started a world conquering mission, which also was to bring order and stability to the civilizations around the world. To achieve this, they rode on horse drawn battle chariots from the steppes. Now, in Rakhigari, we have a chariot. Later on, and they are older than the one which is now we talked about. Later on, they were joined by the by the Hamito-Semitic people who were also great conquerors of humanity. However, they conquered other people. They underwent a transformation. This is the crucial part of Schmidt-Copper's speculative thesis. Historian of religion and linguistics Stephen um, Arviston explains this particular turn thus. These people, Indo-Germans, were, according to Schmidt, born rulers and typically enough belong to an especially strong racial type. The totemic and agrarian matriarchal cultural circles had already melted together at an early stage and formed city states with trade and crafts. It became the civilizational it became the civilizing task of the Indo-Germans and the Semites to create hierarchies that could integrate the city-states. For Schmidt, it was obvious that social order and hierarchies were civilizing steps forward, but he also claimed that the Indo-Germanic ruling class had become arrogant and proud. When the Indo-Germans had lived on steppes, they had humbly worshipped the creator god as the heavenly father. But when they now ruled over foreign people, they began to see themselves as equals of the gods. Schmidt continues that we can see what Indo-Germanic arrogance can lead to in South Asia, where the Brahmins, who claim to represent the Aryan racial purity, uphold a caste system that completely destroying India. The Brahmanic religion shows that the ruling castes have created a heavenly elevation where one no longer walks on earth and where every similarity with the people as a whole has been lost. Let us revisit let us revisit the 2019 narrative. Let us revisit the 2019 narrative presented by Tony Joseph. He provides a racial interpretation of the emergence of endogamy and suggests that the mixing of communities came to a halt in ancient India. According to Joseph, the ancient texts indicate shifting attitude towards the mixing of the races. He also claims that the Aryans brought many things with them, such as Sanskrit, beliefs, rituals, and a patriarchal social structure. He says that these things reshaped our society in fundamental ways. This is a polite way of saying that the Aryans introduced the caste system and placed themselves at the top of the hierarchy. The deep similarity between Tony Joseph's narrative and the speculative Catholic racial anthropology of Francis Schmidt that he developed in 1930s cannot be considered entirely coincidental. Approximating reality with ancestral DNA. Now we come into the part where we learn that how this narrative is something which is imaginary in their own minds. The mysteries of the past are intriguing, especially when, as in the case of the Harappan civilization, they date back more than 5,000 years. How did people live, think, and interact in those ancient times? How did they shape the society as we see today? Many theories have been proposed over the years, but some are based on biblical myths or colonial biases. Colonial biases means the priests who wrote them. However, many modern studies that mm, one of these theories is the Aryan invasion, migration, and subsequent dominant cultural replacement theory. However, many modern studies that use scientific methods and evidence have challenged and refuted this theory. These studies, which include genetic analysis, linguistic modeling, archaeological excavations, demonstrate that there was no mass migration or invasion of Aryans into India. Instead, Harappan civilization declined due to environmental and political factors. The studies also show that there was continuity and interaction between the Harappan and other cultures. All of them contributed to the diversity and richness of Indian society. Therefore, it is important that we focus on the facts and not on the myths as we try to understand our past. Both the Harappan civilization and the Vedic age are part of our heritage, and we can learn a lot from them. By using scientific tools and methods, we can get closer to the truth and appreciate the complexity and beauty of our history. In 2018, popular media published several articles highlighting the research in molecular anthropology in relation to the people of ancient India. The interest in this new research was sparked by new advancements in ancient DNA recovery and analysis. Most of these papers were based on the step hypothesis, which suggests that the migration and invasion of Indo-European speakers occurred between 1700 and 1500 BCE. The same year, a study was published by Dr. Ajit K. Pathak of Estonian Biocenter, Estonian Biocenter Institute of Genomics, University of Tartu, and an international team. The paper titled "The Genetic Ancestry of Modern Indus Valley Populations from Northwest India" is a genome-wide study of four Northwest Indian ethnic groups: the Ror, Gujjar, Jat, and Kamboj, all associated with geographic regions of Indus Valley. The paper compares their genetic data with that of ancient and modern populations from South Asia and West Eurasia, revealing a complex genetic interaction and diversity. The paper's holistic approach made it the best paper at the 2018 International Conference on Human Genetics and Genomics. This paper examines how several historic and prehistoric population movements between South Asia and West Eurasia influenced the genetic diversity of four Northwest Indian populations. The study utilized a new genome-wide genotype data for 45 modern individuals. According to, according to Dr. Pathak, the Ror community from Kurukshetra is genetically more akin to populations living west of India than other groups. Interesting. According to Dr. Pathak, the Ror community from Kurukshetra is North India, just on the border of Punjab. Okay. So Kurukshetra is just adjacent to Delhi. And he mentions genetically more akin to population living in west of India. West of India would be Gujarat and Maharashtra than the other groups. The study also suggests that a sort of genetic continuity between populations living west of Indus Valley and east of Indus Valley, suggesting a higher mobility during prehistorical time in the Indus Valley region. The research was assisted by Anurag Kadian, an IITian who was interested in tracing the ancestral origin of the Roar population. All the samples were collected from individuals living within 100 to 400 kilometers of Kurukshetra. The study reveals that modern Indus populations are very diverse genetically. This diversity may have originated during the ancient Indus era, as archaeological evidence suggests that the tribal features, regional and tribal features. The study also compares ancient DNA worldwide and finds that the Roar and Jat communities are to extent closer to extent an ancient population that lived west of India. However, these two communities also share some genetic affinity with Central Asians and Bronze Age steppe groups, and higher affinity with Anatolian Neolithic than Iranian Neolithic. Dr. Pathak, the lead author of the study, suggests that the Roar and Jat communities could be a key population very close to root population that spread the ancestral North Indian component in South Asia due to high inward and outward mobility of the Indus people, probably for trade. The study supports that idea that the original population was not replaced by an invasion or a large-scale migration from steppes. In 2018, Professor Vashant Shinde, a renowned archaeologist, and a team of Korean scientists explored a cemetery district at Harappan site at Rakhigari, Haryana. Later, Shinde and an international team also extracted genomic data from remains of a female individual named 16113 who lived in the Harappan civilization. Their study revealed some surprising aspects regarding her ancestry. A significant finding of this paper is that 16113 is the best modeled as a mixture of two ancestral components, one related to ancient Iranian and the other to Southeast Asian hunter-gatherers. Interestingly, this ancestry profile of 16113 from Turkmenistan and eastern Iran, buried in sites with cultural connections to Indus Valley Civilization. Perhaps the more striking result is that the ancient Iranian component of the IVC, Indus Valley Civilization, that is IVC, derives from a lineage that is ancestral to ancient Iranian hunter-gatherers, herders, and farmers. This suggests that the movement of farmers from further west did not drive agricultural innovation in South Asia, or at least left little genetic trace. The second key finding of the study is that lack of step-related ancestry in the IVC individual. The paper explains this result in consort with the absence of Anatolian and Iranian farmer components in 16113 supports the notion that Indo-European languages arrived from Western Europe via Central Asia sometime after 2000 BCE, rather than from the rather than from Anatolia via Iran with the arrival of farming. Interesting. In other words, this is a typical Aryan Indo-European steppe invasion migration hypothesis with the time scale neatly fitted within the 2000 BC coming of Indo-European languages. Archaeologists, Jon- however, archaeologist Jonathan Mark Keynote. Jon- गुड मॉर्निंग सुप्रभात दीदी. आज नव वर्ष है तो नए साल में चलो सुबह सुबह ही अच्छे काम करना करते हैं और क्या. ओके, लेट मी चेक few things. Good. Today we have three sessions. So this session will end in about 10-15 minutes. Then again at 11:30 p.m. we are going to now do a Hindi podcast with an author who has wrote extensively books on the Shakti worship in East India. There's going to be, and we can also talk about ritual of Navratri and different ways of Shakti worship in East India, and also we'll some talk about in also West India. Then at 1 p.m. Then at 1 p.m. we are going to have a political discussion. We are launching a new program. We are launching a new series called Navapravah. Let me just share you a glimpse. Let me share. So at 1 p.m. we are launching a new program. This program is called the program will be like this. It's called Navaprabha, where we're going to talk about the current affairs and news stories. So we will have one or two programs each month where we're going to discuss, analyze with political analysts, with maybe journalists, maybe with political leaders regarding the happenings, news stories which are happening. So this will we launch this today at 1 p.m. So we have a packed schedule. Okay, let's finish this in about 10-15 minutes and then we will take a break and again we'll back at 11:30 a.m. In the other words, this is a typical Aryan or Indo-European steppe invasion migration hypothesis with the time scale neatly fitted within the 2000 BC coming of the Indo-European languages. However, archaeologist Jonathan Mark Kinoa was not entirely satisfied by this explanation, cautioning against such generalization based on the study of DNA from a single person. He pointed out that the Harappan sites were cosmopolitan centers of their age, and hence one person's genetic makeup might not match the rest of population. He also emphasized that burial was a less common way of dealing with dead than cremation. So, Ugadi we had the Ugadi. Today also is Ugadi is celebrated in South India. With the dead and cremation. So whatever we do have from cemeteries is not representative of the ancient population of the Indian cities, but only one part of the one community living in these cities. In 2019, sometimes before publication of the Rakhigari paper, another paper was published in Science by a team of as many as 92 scientists from various international institutions. The authors of this paper analyzed the ancient DNA of 523 people who lived in Central Asia and Northern South Asia over the past 8,000 years. Their findings suggested that the people who brought the the steppe ancestry to modern South Asians were mostly men. Additionally, they found that the steppe ancestry was more common in certain groups such as Brahmins and wait, interesting. They found that the steppe ancestry was more common in certain groups such as Brahmins and Bhumihars from Bhumihars than others. These findings support the idea that the Indo-European languages spoke in South Asia came from the steppe. 3 years later, Kinover reinforced his opinion on Rakhegari, a DNA analysis, and wrote, the one fragmentary DNA recently recovered at Rakhegari provides some hope that more DNA will eventually be recovered as new techniques for recovery are developed. However, we must remember that only a very small segment of Indus society practiced burial of the dead. Most of the ancient Indus dead would have been treated in other ways such as cremation, water burial, water burial, exposure in the forest. Since we will never be able to recover DNA from most of the people who lived in these cities, we need to understand from the outset that we may never sort out the diversity of people living in these early urban centers from DNA studies. Parallel, parallel complementing such studies, it is also important to consider linguistic studies. As linguistic models of ancient languages became more refined and robust, they shed light on the problem of their formation and spread. The studies have revealed complexities that defy simplistic notions of invasions, migrations, and replacements. Hmm. The chapter is pretty big, so we'll not able to finish it. But let's see, we can finish this one. A more complex picture from linguistic studies. The study published in Nature in 2003 investigated the origin and spread of Indo-European languages. The study analyzed a matrix of 87 languages with 2499 lexicon items and concluded that these languages expanded with the spread of agriculture from Anatolia around 8000 to 9500 years before present. The study compared two dominant hypotheses, the steppe hypothesis, and which proposes that Indo-European languages spread by horse-riding pastoralists, and Anatolia hypothesis, which suggests that Indo-European languages diffused by farming. The study found more support for the Anatolia hypothesis. At the same time, the study did not rule out the step expansion hypothesis, also known also known as the Kurgan expansion, completely. It is a well-known theory that traces of the origin and spread of the Indo-European languages and cultures to the nomadic pastoralists who lived in the Eurasian steppes. These people, often wrongly called Aryans, are believed to have migrated or invaded different regions of Europe and Asia with their horses and chariots. This theory is familiar to many Indians who have a complex and contested history with the concept of Aryan invasion. So when the study also stated the following, it kept the windows open for possible linguistic validation of Aryan invasion in future detailed studies. The consensus tree also shows evidence of a period of rapid divergence giving rise to the Italic, Celtic, Balto-Slavic, and perhaps Indo-Iranian families that is intriguingly close to the times suggested for possible Kurgan expansion. Then another paper published in 2015 used a phylogenetic analysis in which ancestry constraints permit a more accurate inference of rates of change. To support the step hypothesis suggested hypothesis, suggesting that the Indo-European languages originated in the Pontic Caspian steppe and spread through migration and cultural diffusion. However, the paper had a questionable assumption as it dated Vedic Sanskrit to 1500 to 1000 BCE or 3250 BP. The same year, another paper in Nature concluded a massive migration from steppe as a source of Indo-European languages in Europe. Of course, this was the context of Europe, but this had a clear implications for Indo-European languages coming to India in a similar manner. Meanwhile, in 2018, another paper published in the Royal Society of Open Science based on the based on a Bayesian phylogenetic study of the Dravidian language family concluded a median root age of the Dravidian language family as around 4000 to 4500 years BP, while not excluding the possibility that the root of the Dravidian language family is 6000 to 6500 years old. This is important because the possibility of the non-deciphered in the script being Proto-Dravidian has been conflated in the political discourse of India as a Tamil language itself. In 2023, Paul Hegarty and his team published a groundbreaking paper in Science. The paper caused a significant stir in the academia studying the origin and spread of Indo-European languages. The team of researchers used a more rigorous approach to study the subject, applying Bayesian phylogenetic methods to a large dataset of core vocabulary from 161 Indo-European languages. The study results suggest a new, of earlier chronology for the origin of these languages. They also propose a hybrid hypothesis that combines insights from linguistics and genetics. All subsequent quotes are from this paper. The step hypothesis the step hypothesis suggests that about 3,500 years ago, Indo-European languages were introduced to the Indian region through a horse-based pastoral expansion, which is currently referred to as Aryan invasion theory. It is believed that the Iranic separated from Indo-European around 4,300 years ago, approximately 2300 BCE. Furthermore, the Indo-Iranic branch has been linked to the Balto-Slavic branch of the Indo-European, which is a key aspect of the step hypothesis. The paper constructs the timeline for the major branching out of the Indo-European languages. Our analysis indicates that the Indo-European family began with a series of major branching events in relatively quick succession from 8,120 year BP 6,740 to 9,610 year BP to 6,140 year BP to about 4,540 to 7,880 year BP. Indo-Europeans had split into seven branches long before steppe ancestry spread into Europe and the Altai. These seven included the Anatolian, Greco-Armenian, Indo-Iranic branches, for which a DNA shows little or no genetic influx from the steppe at 5,300 to 4,900 year BP. That is, at time at time depths early enough to match our estimated step times. It explained the incompatibility of the step hypothesis with the available data. Recent ancient DNA data from Central and South Asia have sought to trace movements of people into Western and South Asia by migration southward from the steppe. However, from the archaeological However, from the period of 4300 to 3700 year BP, samples from the bacteria, Bactria marginia archaeological complex do not yet attest to any such southward migration. Steppe ancestry is not found until 3500 year BP in the Gandhara cave culture of northern Pakistan, and only at limited proportions. The interpretation that this ancestry can be identified with the first Indo-Iranic dispersal into South Asia is not straightforwardly compatible with our earlier date for the separation of Indo-Iranic from the rest of Indo-European. Criti- Crucially, linking Indo-Iranic to the Balto-Slavic branching from Indo-European, which is, as early pointed out, a vital component of the step hypothesis, is also shown as unsupported by data. In particular, in step hypothesis, Indo-Iranic and the Indo-Iranic, the major eastern branch of Indo-European, was one of the last two main branches to emerge out of a final major clad with Balto-Slavic. Our results contradict this in both chronology and tree topology. Indo-Iranic branches of early 6980 year BP, 5650 to 8400 year BP, and support for common clad with Balto-Slavic is minimal. The 2023 paper also looked into a possibility previously excluded in the 2019 paper on the ancient genomic data of Harappan individuals. Previous interpretations of ancient DNA from one individual from the Indus periphery sought to exclude a direct eastward route on the basis of the degree and timing of Anatolian admixture, but these have been superseded by methodological and analytical refinements which no longer exclude this scenario entirely. More, okay, more pernicious, parsimonious geographically, at least would be a route for Indo-Iranic directly eastward out of South Caucasus homeland through the Iranian plateau south of Caspian. Combined, these studies increasingly suggest that the Harappan civilization was not a monolith. It was a more complex and diverse society with multiple sources of ancestry and multiple languages. Despite the apparent gradual collapse around 1900 BCE, its genetic and linguistic heritage has continued to persist in South Asia and was later renewed with strong continuity. The history of Harappan civilization and its subsequent transformation is a complex and fascinating one. Researchers have long sought to fit new data into the um, Yamana steppe expansion hypothesis, which suggests that the Indo-European language were brought to the region by horse riding invaders around 1500 to 1200 BCE. This theory has been set against the backdrop of the demise of the Harappan civilization, with some even suggesting that it was the cause of the downfall. However, more data emerges and more rigorous scientific methodologies are applied. This simplistic model fails to hold up. Indian historians and archaeologists have often questioned this scenario, advocating for a civilizational continuity and highlighting the continuities and similarities between the Harappan and the present day Indian civilization. They propose a gradual transition rather than a sudden apocalyptic demise, and even question the use of term Aryan as an ethnic label. What emerges as what emerges is a picture of multilingual, non-monocultural Harappan civilization. Again, what emerges is a picture of multilingual, non-monocultural Harappan civilization, one that embodies the spirit of unity in diversity that has been present in this land since ancient times. As the line from Atharva Veda states, hmm, I need to read this. Okay, Janam Vibharti Bihudha. Okay, okay. I think okay, okay. Okay, I need to do not read this because I know this. Okay, people of different ethnicities, languages, and religious traditions. The earth supports them all. So now they talk about what is this? Got it. Now, historian Vasudev Agarwal, in his study of ancient Indian folk traditions, quotes the above Atharva Veda verses to emphasize this diversity with almost a mystical unity as the basis of India's unique continuity. The diversity of the people inhabiting the various parts of country. Uh, okay. Okay. Yathakosam Bahuda Bahuda Janam. The variety of their dialects. Okay. Vivachasam, Vivacha, okay, we've been talking about Vivacham and the multiplicity of their cults. Nana Dharmanam. These were the three significant features of our racial life in the past, as we are as we are with us even today. But these distinctions did not operate to divide the children of the soil whose devotion to the Mother Earth served an overall. The above passage, made in the context of Vedic India's diversity, also seems to describe Harappan society with its ethnic diversity, linguistic diversity, and theo diversity. And yet, the civilization forged a unity in that diversity. In this sense, in a more fundamental way than any other, the Harappan civilization was indeed Vedic, a vibrant tapestry of diverse cultures woven together in harmony. Or Vedic civilization was truly Harappan, and in today's Indian culture, there is an unbroken continuity. So we will end the reading for today. We will again start the reading next week. So thank you very much for joining. Join us again at 11:30 a.m. We are going to talk about the Shakti worship, the Chandi worship in West Bengal with a author and talented author who is going to give a detailed historical ritual details of Shakti worship in East India particularly, and also some aspects of the North and West India. So till then, see you in about half an hour's time. So Jai Shri Ram, Vande Mataram.